Okay, all set to go?
Yes.
All right, great. Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's currently 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, so we like to try and keep things on track as much as possible. And I just want to thank everyone who was able to join us on short notice for this very important update. This is the first of its kind. CBSR has been doing some work with the Humanitarian Coalition over the last 18 months on cross-sector collaboration. We're excited to see where that research project lands, and we'll keep you updated on that progress. But today specifically, we wanted to bring together as many Canadian business actors as possible for this session titled "Welcome to the First Canadian Corporate Update on the Response to the Nepal Earthquake." So with us today, we have Nicholas Moyer, who's the Executive Director at the Humanitarian Coalition, and we will be joined by Jesse Thompson from CARE Canada, who's the Director of Humanitarian Assistance in the Emergency Team. So we'll get some on-the-ground perspective for Nepal as well. And we'll try and save some time at the end of the call. It's going to be relatively brief. We're trying to keep this to a half an hour today. If you do have any questions about how your organization can get involved, we'll try and reserve some time at the end of the call for that. So without any further delay, over to Nicholas at the Humanitarian Coalition. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Wonderful for you to have organized this. Thank you to you and our colleagues at CBSR. So as you've said, the Humanitarian Coalition, which unites CARE Canada, Oxfam Canada, Oxfam Quebec, Plan, and Save the Children, when there are large emergencies like this one, we unite our efforts to respond jointly to ensure that we communicate as coherently as possible with the Canadian public, take the guesswork out of giving, make it as easy as possible to give, and try to raise the profile of these emergencies and the relief efforts. And as you've alluded to, we've worked together a fair bit looking at cross-sector collaboration between the private sector and humanitarian agencies in Canada during emergencies like this one. We've had a number of consultations in Canada since last fall. And, one of the things that has really come out of those meetings is really the request of Canada's corporate community to know more and have some updates such as this one. That's why we've pulled together this call just a little over 1 week after the earthquake struck in Nepal. The way that we wanted to structure this call is that we'll do a brief update from the ground, and I'll hand over in a moment to Jesse Thompson to do that. We'll then talk about the response in Canada of government, of humanitarian agencies, of the Humanitarian Coalition, and we'll be able to take some questions then. Do keep in mind, for all of those that are on the phone, that as far as instructions for this call, everyone's been muted other than the speakers. If you do want to share questions, please don't hesitate along the way using the online chat. Keep in mind, and unfortunately, those calling in won't actually have that option, we're afraid, but you can reach out to us separately afterwards, and we'll be certainly happy to answer some of your questions. It's important to say that the earthquake took place on April 25th, so that's Saturday last week. There was a really rapid, understanding of the scale of the needs there. All the members of the Humanitarian Coalition were present in country, have been for decades, had significant presence on the ground there, and immediately started ramping up response efforts once they took stock of the situation for themselves. They and a number of other major humanitarian agencies in Canada have indeed been responding. Canadians have been incredibly generous in terms of their contributions, and we'll speak to that certainly in a later segment of this call. But I think just to keep everything in context, we will talk about what our response is in Canada, but I think it's very important for us to take stock of what has been going on in Nepal for the last 10 days. And to fill us in on that, Jesse Thompson, who is the Director of Humanitarian Programs and the Emergencies Team at CARE Canada, has agreed from among our membership to provide an update from Nepal. She'll take 5 to 7 minutes to do that. Jesse, I see you're on. Can you hear us? Can you speak? Okay, well, it would appear that we're still struggling to get Jesse on the line. So I'll just continue to speak to a few key items. The significant thing that has obviously happened here in Canada, as you saw in the first few days after the earthquake, so I'll start with the Canadian response, or part of it, until Jesse can join us. initially, right when the earthquake happened, there was a quick mobilization in Canada, and major agencies launched appeals. Immediately that weekend, the Canadian government announced that it was allocating $5 million to the response. $1.5 million of that was allocated to coalition members. Just a few days later, on the Monday last week, the Canadian government announced a matching fund. They will be matching the donations of individual Canadians up to a maximum of $100,000 per donation until May 25th, and so that's a 4-week period. It's important to keep in mind that this is a wonderful opportunity for us to engage Canadians and encourage them to give. It's also important, particularly for those on this call, to keep in mind that this doesn't apply to corporate donations. However, it does apply to employee giving, and so we certainly have seen a number of corporations talking about tripling donations of employees, their own organization doubling and also the government doubling, so equal to a tripling. It's also very significant. Our Canadian government response has ramped up even over the last week with the deployment of the Disaster Assistance Response Team, so the DART from the Canadian Forces. They sent an advanced deployment last weekend and have decided to ramp up that deployment. Over this weekend came the announcement. So they're looking to expand that engagement over in Nepal. And certainly that is significant as well, because it will continue to increase, I think, both Canada's contribution but also the visibility of Canada in the response over this 4-week donation matching period. The Canadian government's also announced an additional $5 million to the UN, and typical of sort of past responses, they're continuing to assess, and I certainly believe that there'll be a much larger overall contribution of Canadians and of the Canadian government to this response. We've had very close ties and engagement with them now, and generally are quite satisfied with their response as that continues to grow. Now, perhaps I'll pause there. I understand that Jesse is online now, so perhaps I'll hand over to you, Jesse, to give us a bit of an update from the field.
Thanks, Nick. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. I did not have my login code. So I will just start with giving a brief update on the situation on the ground and a little bit of information about Caras Response. It won't speak to all of the Humanitarian Coalition partners' responses, but as all agencies or trusted partners on the ground, our responses are complementary and coordinated and have lots of similarities as well. So as you're aware, on the 25th of April, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck Nepal, which caused very significant damage. It's the worst earthquake in Nepal since the 1930s. And they're reporting more damaged houses in this earthquake than even in the 1930s earthquake. So very, very significant. To date, over 6,200 people have been killed and 1,000 more are injured. So lots of people affected by this emergency. In addition, around 8 million people are estimated by the UN to be in need of humanitarian assistance in more than 39 districts across the country, which is almost half of the country of Nepal, and a really significant portion of the total population of Nepal. So really, really big numbers for a response that requires a meaningful response. We're now hearing numbers around 1.4 million people in need of emergency food assistance, and again, shelter and water and sanitation are also really big needs that have been identified. In some of the areas near the epicenter of the quake in Gorkha, it's estimated that 90% of houses were completely destroyed or severely damaged, and so those people in need of shelter and the support needs for shelter are massive. It's also the beginning of the monsoon season, and so as you can imagine, shelter needs are even more urgent than ever because people are out in the open, and as the rains start to come, it won't be very pleasant for them to be outside. It's also really difficult to get goods into the affected areas because of landslides and earthquake-affected areas being inaccessible because of damage due to the earthquake. And we anticipate that once the rains start in a really serious way, that's going to make logistics even more complicated. So that's certainly something that we're very concerned about. I think it's also worth noting that the earthquake was a very significant size and struck close to the capital, so the population density was quite high, and it was very shallow, so earthquakes have more of an impact the closer they are to the Earth's surface, and this earthquake was only 10 kilometers deep, so it was really felt very significantly on on the surface by the people affected. There's also a lot of people who are now dealing with aftershocks. They have subsided a little bit, but there's still small ones happening, and so that's increasing the anxiety of the affected population and affecting the ability to respond. CARE has had a long-standing presence in Nepal, as Nick mentioned, since 1978, and so before the crisis we had 150 staff working in Nepal with CARE. Most of those are national staff, so people from Nepal working in Nepal in development programming, and so they've been remobilized in order to scale up the response. But I think it's worth noting that all of those people have homes and families affected by the earthquake because they live in Nepal, and so we're having to find a way to take care of our staff while also responding. We've also deployed in almost 15 rapid response team members, the final one arriving tomorrow, and they're supporting the country office with surge support, just recognizing the scale of the emergency and recognizing that the country office, even though it had a long-standing capacity, needs a bit of extra support. CARE is seeking to reach 100,000 people with life-saving humanitarian assistance, which includes emergency shelter and clean water, as well as food assistance. But we know that this isn't just a short-term emergency response and that people are going to need support to rebuild their lives, restart their livelihoods, and rebuild their homes. So it's not just the emergency response that we're focused on, but also the long-term recovery effort. And we know in the context of an earthquake that takes time because the rubble takes time to clear, and it takes time to start rebuilding homes and making sure that we're rebuilding homes in a way that's safe. So we're building back safer so that if there is an earthquake in the future, that those houses are better able to withstand an earthquake going forward. To date, CARE has distributed relief items in Kathmandu and in Gorkha, reaching over 3,000 people with food, sleeping mats, water purification, hygiene items, and has a number of relief supplies on the way from the region as well as being procured locally. So that response effort is scaling up, but the needs are still massive, and that's really really critical in these days ahead to make sure that we're reaching those who are most in need. I think of interest, we're also concerned not just about those immediate needs as a result of the earthquake, but also the impact that this emergency can have on women and girls, particularly pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers, and their infants. And that's because hospitals and clinics are overwhelmed with injured people and roads are damaged, and so it can be difficult for pregnant women to access medical facilities. Nepal already had one of the worst maternal mortality rates in the world, so we already knew that women and pregnant women were particularly at risk, and in the absence of access to health care, that can be a huge challenge. We also know that in the 2011 census, more than a third of households were female-headed, and that's because a lot of Nepalese men migrate to the Gulf and in the region in search of work. And so a lot of households that we're identifying as affected in the epicenter and in surrounding areas are actually female-headed, and that's because their male head of family is elsewhere outside of Nepal working. And so that does also increases the vulnerability of those households and means that we have to be thoughtful about how we respond to the particular needs of women and girls in this emergency. I think one of the biggest challenges to date, and I think it's important to note, is the issue of logistics and accessing more remote areas. The roads were already windy, small rural roads and have been affected by the earthquake, by landslides, or because the bridges are broken because of the earthquake itself. One of the first trucks bringing our supplies from India was stuck at a landslide on its way to Gorkha district yesterday because the landslide had blocked the road and had created a massive traffic jam. So that creates a long delay, and those kinds of things are affecting our ability to access those who are most in need. So we're trying to find creative solutions, and in some cases hiking long distances in order to reach communities, but we need obviously a way to get those goods in to those who've been affected. The only other thing I would add is that coordination is critical in a disaster like this, so we're working really closely with the UN partners as well as other NGO partners to make sure that we're coordinating our response and that we're not duplicating efforts and ensuring that we're not leaving gaps in the response. That's critical to ensuring that when the needs are so massive, that those who are most in need get the assistance that they need and deserve. So that coordination is critical, and that coordination happens in the field, but it's also happening here in Ottawa through the Humanitarian Coalition, which is one of the really, I think, important and special things about the Humanitarian Coalition in a disaster like this. I'll leave it there, Nick, unless you want me to expand on anything in particular beyond that.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Jesse. I think, I'll move on with a few updates from Canada, and certainly if anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in online on the chat. And we have, still until 2:30 if there are questions, if you want to put those out there. So thanks again, Jesse. I think maybe just, obviously she has the closest links to the field of all of those probably on this call. But I'd just like to add, what CARES experience is really what's echoed by all the other members of the Humanitarian Coalition. And like CARE, they had significant presence in country, collectively had well over 300 staff in the country when the disaster hit. And just a reminder also that it really is one of the world's poorest countries, and Human Development Index ranks Nepal at 145th. There are huge needs in that country, and it was already a country, incredibly deserving of development assistance before even this earthquake struck. And obviously, the implications for the long term are large and significant. In fact, the UN has launched an appeal of $415 million just for the response. We know that Canada is looking at the government's response as part of that, contributing to the UN. So I'll just speak a little bit to, I did give a brief update on the government's response already, so I'll just skip in the interest of time to the Humanitarian Coalition and the response that we've had here to date. The Humanitarian Coalition launched its appeal on the day of the earthquake. As some of you know, the Humanitarian Coalition is structured in such a way that it really is intended to be a one-stop shop in emergencies, a full collaboration between its member agencies, mirroring a little bit the coordination that our agencies have in the field, on the ground that Jesse was just talking about. We collaborate here in Canada on the joint messaging, having a one-stop shop in terms of giving, and making sure that we take the duplication out of fundraising efforts wherever we can. And so we launched our appeal, put out a number of joint news releases. We've developed a joint advertising campaign that's gone out, PSAs and ads and so on. And so the only things you'll see on Google advertisement, for example, you won't see our members, you'll just see the Humanitarian Coalition. And I'll speak a little bit to how these have spread out. So far, we've raised $4.6 million. That's including the $1.5 million that the members received from government, so $3.1 million from individual Canadians. That's a wonderful sort of show of the generosity that Canadians have been demonstrating. We certainly expect that to continue over the matching fund period, likely with a bump near the end of May, just ahead of the end of the matching fund deadline. Media coverage was really significant in the first few days, but as we often see, after 5 days after the emergency, media coverage started to drop off. We certainly saw that it had dropped quite a bit off over the weekend, although there was continuing coverage, and I think there will continue to be. Obviously now this story must compete with other headlines and other national news, for example, the Alberta election coming up and so on. So just to speak a little bit to sort of what we've been seeing, certainly from the Humanitarian Coalition side, we've seen an immense and really fabulous contribution of many of our corporate partners. I can only cite some examples. I can't give the full list, but PayPal, for example, PayPal Canada immediately on day one transformed their homepage to a redirect to our donation page, encouraging their visitors to go there. In the subsequent days, on Tuesday, after discussions back and forth with them, Visa and MasterCard are also waiving fees on donation transactions. Our Rapid Response Network partners, Bell Media, Shaw Media, Rogers TV, CBC Radio-Canada, to a lesser extent, but still, and Pattison Outdoor are some of those that are helping us promote our sort of fundraising campaign. It's important for me to say that we don't purchase any of the ads that are out there. We've got great contributions from all of the different properties, TV, radio, online, of Bell Media, of Shaw, and others, and so leveraging those to the extent that we can. We've got a few new contributors this time around, which we're really happy to see as well. With Maclean's and L'Actualité, the Chronicle Herald being a few print sort of news sites and vehicles that are promoting our appeal as well. A number of smaller ones just feel like worth mentioning: the Hill Times, iPolitics, and Newswatch, helping us with some of the visibility, as well as eBay.ca, which is broadcasting our appeal. We've certainly seen also some really great financial contributions. TELUS, for example, made a leadership gift of $20,000 to Plan Canada. There have been large union donations, from public service unions and so on to Oxfam Canada and Oxfam Quebec. We've certainly seen a number of major gifts coming in, and certainly can't list them all. But Ernst & Young started an employee group fundraising campaign for Plan Canada. Rona as well, the superstores have started for the first time a fundraising campaign for the Humanitarian Coalition. And so we're really grateful for those contributions, obviously incredibly needed. In terms of additional contributions, there are many ways that these could potentially be made, and we certainly welcome those. In terms of what those might look like, we'd certainly be happy to engage anyone who would like with our members. If you have links to Nepal or specific contributions that you think are appropriate in this time. One of the things that's important for me to underline is what I've also been saying in media interviews. Canadians are very generous, as is corporate Canada. It's very important that they be conscious of what are the best kinds of donations, and at this early stage, it really is financial contributions, particularly because they are more efficient and effective. We can transmit them a lot more quickly. We don't have the transportation costs as well associated with transporting goods from Canada. We can also ensure the consistency of product on location, buy things locally, supporting the local economy, limiting transportation costs, getting consistency of goods, and also cultural appropriateness, which are always very important. So I think at this stage I will stop there. I'm certainly welcome questions, if any. I'm certainly happy to answer them. I have also put up the email for Marie-Ève Bertrand, who's also on our call and was key in organizing this call for everyone. She can be reached certainly about anything of interest to corporations in Canada, anything you'd like to ask or contribute perhaps, and you can reach her certainly at the number and email that's provided there. Just going to check if no questions. There's so many participants and no questions. I hope that means that you're all enjoying what you're hearing. This is the first time that we do this, and obviously we want to make sure that it's relevant to you. Certainly if there are things that you would like to follow up with us on, please do. If you have suggestions about what else we might cover in calls like this, certainly let us know. In the meantime, we will consider whether we want to organize another one of these calls, perhaps in a few weeks, perhaps before the end of the matching fund. I gave examples of what some of corporate Canada is doing. There's a lot more, of course, and we're working to collect that information. If you can tell us what you're doing, we're certainly interested in knowing, and we'll be tabulating that information as we consider ways to report back to corporate Canada and help organizations see what each other are doing. I do want to also make a point of saying that this crisis, while it will disappear from the media, will really continue for a very long time. Members of the Humanitarian Coalition will be part of the recovery and reconstruction efforts, as will a number of other trusted humanitarian agencies in Canada. And it's very important for us to be prepared for that long run, that long-term engagement in those countries. One of the things that the Humanitarian Coalition does, which very few others do, is we do joint evaluations of programs. And so in 3 months, we'll do a first evaluation, see how things are going and coming along, and we may certainly be in touch with you again at that point. And continue, of course, we continue, of course, to liaise closely with government and make sure that we contribute to them in terms of information and liaising with respect to Canada's response to Nepal. I still see no questions. I'm going to take that as I do as a good sign that we've been telling you what you want to hear. I don't know
Nick,
if
I've got one question for you, Nick. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds like in the very short term, financial donations are an appropriate response. But as you pointed out, and I think it was an important note, is that this engagement will be ongoing and sustained in order to help the people of Nepal most affected, that this won't be solved in a week or two. So I'm wondering if beyond sort of the financial donations that we're hoping to encourage over the coming weeks, and certainly during the matching period, what does a sustained relationship look like with Humanitarian Coalition and the aid agencies that you represent from the corporate sector and the small and medium business sector in Canada? How can they sort of stay involved and stay connected beyond those donations for the duration of your support?
It's a good question, and there's not obviously, the label private sector is very large, and so it's hard to give you just one answer to that. I think it's very important for, indeed, corporations to think about the long run. If any are willing to look at a longer-term engagement, certainly members of the Humanitarian Coalition are going to be preparing their long-term recovery and reconstruction plans over the coming weeks, and there really is an opportunity to engage. And there very much is room for corporate collaboration where there's alignment. Reconstruction will take many forms, from obviously shelter, schools that need to be rebuilt, health services that need to be provided. There's really a range, and there certainly may be opportunities for the contributions of human resource expertise, whether in the legal department, HR, finance, all of these are needs that will obviously be real over the coming weeks and months. But there also could be opportunities for larger scale collaborations where there's alignment. I can't, specifically say who and where to contact right now beyond suggesting emailing Marie-Ève, who can then connect you with our members if there is interest. We certainly will follow up very quickly because we don't want to lose that opportunity if some of you want to engage. So hopefully that's helpful, Steve. I don't know if Jesse, you want to add anything?
No, Nick, that's great. Thanks so much. Nothing to add from my side.
Okay.
Thank you both. I'm just thinking out loud, Nicholas, that once you do receive the report from the aid agencies on the ground on what's going to be needed, I'm wondering if those folks will be calling out those needs fairly specifically. We might be able to re-engage with certainly our members and sort of industry in Canada and say, here are the needs. Who can step up and fulfill some of those needs? Maybe that's an interesting next step or engagement for this audience and a wider audience if there's interest.
Yeah, I think we will keep our ears to the ground to see if we can get that information, and if we can, I think it would be great to be able to report back with that. We have also toyed with the idea of doing a bit of a debrief, but maybe that could be framed differently as well as an opportunity to sort of lay out a longer-term vision and sort of open some doors for the possibility of further collaboration. Maybe something we could be doing around sort of 3 months after the earthquake. I do want to say as well that we got another question online, which was just from Julianne Hills. She asked who to reach out to if you want to share what you have done in response to the Nepal earthquake. Please do share that information by emailing Marie-Ève. We will put that information together. Obviously, this is one of the bigger challenges that we've identified. Canadians and corporations want to know what everyone's doing, but we need to collect that information. So we're going to start that process now, and Marie-Ève has offered to receive that information, and we'll try to compile that to report back also to CBSR's membership as well.
That's great. Thank you. And thanks for the question, Julian.
Okay, well, that's the end of our time. I haven't seen another question come up. Let me just double check. Nope. So again, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to Stephen and everyone at CBSR for organizing this. Do get in touch, anyone, if you'd like, with Marie-Ève Bertrand, if you want to follow up on this discussion specifically. And do let us know if you'd like to have another call like this, or if there's anything else we could provide. We're happy to follow up. So thanks again, everyone. Wonderful. Thanks for the update. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Nicholas.
Thanks for including me.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.